50 years of World Heritage. What has been achieved? What has not been achieved? What has to be done in face of this war? This session will be moderated by Professor Friedrich Schipper. He is Executive President of Blue Shield Austria. Professor Schipper is an archaeologist and specialized with cultural heritage of the Near East. He has been actively engaged in illicit trafficking in cultural property and civil-military cooperation, among others. He is a chairperson of the Competence Center for Cultural Heritage Management and Communication at University of Vienna. He is serving as Cultural Property Protection Officer at the Austrian Peacekeeper Association and the Theresian Military Academy of the Austrian Armed Forces. Please welcome Professor Schipper to the podium. And I have a book for Dr. Rimbeck to have a good memory of this conference.
Thank you very much. Two most important things. I have not been actively involved in illicit trafficking, but in combating illicit trafficking. Second, the 10 minutes of my introduction are already consumed, so I will reduce my introduction to one sentence. Beyond the fact that we are celebrating the 50 years of the World Heritage Convention against the backdrop of a very close armed conflict, this armed conflict is nevertheless not the focus of our conference. It's the role of civil society in protecting cultural heritage. And this is what the upcoming session is focusing on, and was composed by Marie-Therese Albert by selecting the keynote speaker and the panelists. And I want to go straight away to introduce our keynote speaker, Joseph King, who is the Senior Director in the Office of the Director General of ICCROM. Joseph King provides support for the Director General in the implementation of the mandates of the organization, with the particular focus on governance. He is an architect and urban planner, and he also leads a team of professionals in all aspects of ICCROM's role as an advisory body to the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, where he has represented ICCROM for 25 years. ICCROM, by the way, is not just an advisory body to UNESCO in terms of the World Heritage Convention, but also in terms of the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict. At ICCROM, he has been Director of Partnership and Communication and Director of the Sites Unit, responsible for capacity building programs and for the conservation of immovable cultural heritage around the world. Mr. Joseph King, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schipper, and I would very much like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers of this event, the Institute for Heritage Studies, particularly Professor Marie-Therese Albert, thank you very much, and also the German Federal Office for the opportunity really to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention with friends and colleagues who are throughout this room today. And I really do appreciate the possibility of being able to be with all of my friends, because I've been working now for 25 years in World Heritage, and I'm actually half the age. My work in World Heritage is exactly half the age of the convention itself. So, I'm really appreciative of this possibility. I would also like to take the opportunity, because she's going to be embarrassed, everyone keeps mentioning her, to mention Brigitte Ringbach also, because everyone knows her work on World Heritage, as a member of the World Heritage Committee, as the German person working in Germany on this. But for 8 years, she was also a council member at ICCROM. And that's a little bit more behind the scenes. But actually, I would argue, at least as important, to make sure that ICCROM is running in the right direction, and she was a key person for many years in doing that. So I'd like to actually join also in paying tribute to a really great career. Finally, just in terms of introduction, I bring greetings on behalf of my Director General, Dr. Weber Ndoro, who would very much have liked to have been here today. Unfortunately, had a prior commitment, and so he asked me to represent him today. So now to move on. In thinking about the overall theme for this session, we're talking about a vision for civil society, and I've been asked specifically to talk about the intergovernmental and technical view and how gaps can be filled. So when I began to think about this, I began thinking about what are the gaps that we're actually talking about on the World Heritage List. When we talk about gaps, usually we're referring to two things. We're referring to gaps in the list itself. We're referring to gaps in usually regional, so there are gaps because Europe is maybe overrepresented and other regions are maybe underrepresented, and sometimes we talk about it from a thematic point of view. So, for example, modern heritage is maybe underrepresented, archaeological heritage may be overrepresented, religious heritage may be overrepresented. That's one way to look at it, and that's usually the way we have looked at it in the World Heritage Convention. But I would actually like to be a little bit more holistic and look at it in a wider way, because there are some other gaps that we also need to be dealing with. We need to be dealing with the gap between a focus on nomination and inscription as instead of conservation and management of sites that are already on the World Heritage List. That's actually a huge gap as far as I'm concerned. Everyone cares about getting sites on the list. They don't care so much about what happens to those sites once they're on the list. Not everyone, but I think that's one. I think that's one gap. There's a gap between the way we look at cultural heritage and natural heritage. I think that's another thing to look at, and I would also argue tangible and intangible heritage. So those are, I think, also gaps that we need to look at. And then another gap, and that's actually the theme of this particular section, let's say, is the gap in the involvement of civil society in the work of the World Heritage Committee. And I think that's also another very important gap that we need to be looking at. And yes, we still need to pay attention to the regional gaps. That is a problem. You know, Africa is underrepresented, but we have all of these gaps that we need to be looking at. Now, in terms of this theme of civil society, I was also thinking, well, you know, why ICCROM? Why would I be making this? Because ICCROM is an IGO. It's an intergovernmental organization. It's not civil society. You know, we're decidedly not. And the fact of the matter is that the World Heritage Convention is an intergovernmental process. It's made up of states parties. You know, the Constitution, the Convention, the Constitution of World Heritage, you know, talks about states parties, and decision making is made by states parties and by the committee specifically, representation of the states parties. And I think we need to recognize that as a let's say sort of as a framework, and again, that's I think where an important gap actually exists and something that we need to be working on. You know, the operational guidelines are approved by the committee. You know, decisions on what gets inscribed and what goes on the World Heritage List in danger are made by committee members who are states parties, and civil society is not really very present in that. And I think we need to recognize that, and we need to try to understand that. Now, that's not to say that civil society doesn't exist at all within this. The truth of the matter is that ICCOMOS is an NGO. It is, I would argue, a civil society organization. It's made up of professionals, it's heritage professionals, but it is actually an NGO. And I would argue is part of civil society. IUCN also is hybrid. IUCN is intergovernmental, but it is also non-governmental, and it's a hybrid. So I think at least in terms of who the advisory bodies are, not ICCROM, we're intergovernmental fully, but the other two advisory bodies, I think there is at least a place, let's say, for civil society, and I'll come back to that again in a minute. But the other thing that I would want to mention in terms of thinking about civil society is it's not completely missing from the World Heritage Convention because, and you all know this, Article 5A states clearly that states parties should adopt a general policy which aims to give cultural and natural heritage a function in the life of the community. Well, the community is civil society. I mean, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about civil society. So it is there, but there's a problem with it. It's an object, it's not a subject. Civil society in that case is something that the convention is telling states parties to operate on, to operate on something, to be an actor on something, to bring life to the civil society, to populations, to local communities, and I think that's a bit of a problem that we need to be looking at. Now, since 1972, when the convention was adopted, we've begun to understand more and more that there is a need to work with local populations, local people, civil society, in order to ensure the good conservation and management of any heritage, not just World Heritage, but actually any heritage, with World Heritage as a subset of that. And in fact, I'm proud to say that ICCROM, already 15 years ago, started developing something that we call people-centered approaches to conservation. The idea behind that people-centered approaches is that people must be protagonists in the conservation of their heritage, not just spectators. So they have to be actors in the process. They must share in benefits, but they also must be involved in decision-making, they must be involved in management, they must be involved in conservation. As many of my friends in sub-Saharan Africa are fond of saying, nothing about us without us. And that's a very specific context in relation to Africa and its colonial history, but I think it's actually still something that's important for us to think about in a more general sense. We are not conserving the heritage for civil society. Civil society actually has to be a part of that, that process. So this can actually be done at many levels, and I'm going to make sort of some suggestions in a way. Even within, I would say, even within the current framework, at the level of the advisory bodies, for example, I think some of you are aware that there have been some efforts to add even more advisory bodies to the World Heritage System. Now, I'm not sure that I consider that to be such a good idea per se, adding additional advisory bodies, because I think we run the risk of losing sort of, let's say, a consistency of advice as we move forward, and I think we need to be careful about that. But having said that, I think it is the advisory bodies can actually start to involve civil society in a more serious way, and I think that's something that we need to be working on. ICOMOS and IUCN could involve civil society more in their evaluation of nominations, in their panels, for example. All three of us, could be using civil society more in examining state of conservation and taking the opinions of civil society into account as we carry out reactive monitoring missions, as we write state of conservation reports, et cetera. And I think that's something that we do need to think about more. Now, again, at the level of consistency, one of my concerns about too many advisory bodies is that if there's too much advice coming from too many different people and it's not being filtered, sometimes that does create problems. I actually recall, and Mechtel will remember this, I'm sure, but there was a time when, and I'm talking not about nominations, but state of conservation reports, there was a time when within the state of conservation reports, ICOMOS would make its comments, ICCROM, if we were involved in a particular site, would make our comments, the World Heritage Center would have their comments, and those comments wouldn't always match with each other. And the World Heritage Committee actually asked us to consolidate those, and it actually created a process where we have meetings on state of conservation between the advisory bodies and the World Heritage Center, where we can discuss things, and we can actually come out with a much stronger analysis and set of advice for the World Heritage Committee to discover. And I think, again, that's the sort of thing that I think we can work on with civil society. We can start bringing those ideas in. Now, it's also interesting that there's often a lack of civil society involvement with the states parties themselves. And I think states parties could use civil society much better as partners in all of the various processes of the World Heritage Convention. Tentative lists, why is that being done only in an office somewhere? And this is not accusatory to any one particular country, but why are tentative lists being drawn up in an office in a Ministry of Culture somewhere? Why isn't there a process within a country bringing together different actors within civil society to actually discuss that and come up with your tentative list? The development of nomination files, that's again something that I think could have a much stronger involvement of civil society, and again, I think conservation and management. Now, the problem with that, of course, is it's easy for me to say that here in a room at the front of a podium, but you're talking about 190, I can't remember now, 195, 196 states parties. And it's hard to get everyone in, to be doing that. But I think we do need to be encouraging that. And I think civil society could play, or should play, a much stronger role at the state party level in relation to World Heritage. Now, it's also true at the committee level, and I think that's also true at the committee level in terms of committee delegations. Sorry, I was talking about states parties and members of the committee. Nothing stops a state party from actually having on its delegation representatives of civil society in their countries. Expertise. The committee used to be much more expert than it is now. It's more political than it was in the past, at least when I started 25 years ago. But bringing that expertise in, again, it doesn't have to necessarily be expertise related to the national government. There's no reason why they couldn't be bringing civil society actors in as members of the delegation. So that's also something I think that one could think about. Having said all of that, I think the committee itself and the processes of the committee itself are still quite lacking in terms of the involvement of civil society. And that's because the committee tends to, I'm going to use the word jealously, but I don't mean that negatively, but it tends to jealously guard its decision-making and its debate and decision-making processes. And I think this is an area that, to be honest with you, there's been, I'll use the word failure here, there's been a failure to date to bring in more civil society. And I'm going to point, my example that I'm going to point to on this is what I consider to be my saddest day in 25 years of World Heritage, and that was the meeting in 2001 where the World Heritage Indigenous Peoples Council was it was a proposal to have a council of indigenous people to deal with sites particularly related to indigenous issues. Not as an advisory body, but as an additional council to provide advice where it was, where a particular site warranted that issue. And while some members of the committee were very supportive of this, a significant number of them were not, for a variety of reasons. And as the debate went on, I began to feel more and more sorry for the person, the woman who was actually making the presentation on behalf of the indigenous people. It was really the saddest day for me in 25 years. Another area that's lacking, I would say, is the fact that members of NGOs and civil societies, while they can attend the meeting as observers, World Heritage Committee, they can't speak until after decisions are taken. They're not allowed to take the floor. Now, that's also done for particular reasons related also to time management. And, again, those of you that have been in World Heritage for a long time will remember some very late nights where the committee sessions just went on interminably forever. And so in an attempt to deal with that, they said, okay, we need to limit the debate really to committee members, and then, someone can take the floor, an observer can take the floor, but only after the decisions have been taken. And I think that's also something that needs to be looked at, and something that I think needs to be that needs to be changed, and I think that's something that could theoretically be changed. The last area that I would talk about is, and you can't imagine ICCROM making a presentation anywhere and not talking about this, and that is in capacity building, because that is actually what our main area within the convention is, and this is something else where we can work, I think, with civil society very strongly. Part of that, and that's in many different prongs. One of them is obviously building capacity of civil society to work better within the World Heritage System, because the World Heritage System is complex. It's got jargon, it's got processes that are not always very clear. So one of the things that we can do is we can actually work to build capacity of civil society organizations in order to allow them to participate more effectively. A second area that we can be working with civil society is actually working on doing capacity building together, because actually it's the civil society that has a lot of information and a lot of important aspects or ways of thinking about things, and we need to be involving them in the capacity building, not only as subjects, but again, as protagonists of the capacity building. And I think that's especially true, again, when we talk about conservation and management of the cultural heritage. And I'll point to Mali. This has already been mentioned 2 or 3 times already. But when Lazare Lundu went to Mali, he could have never done the work of conservation, reconstruction, restoration without civil society. They had the skills, they had the knowledge, they had the time, they had everything. And Lazare could have never done what he did without a strong relationship with civil society. And UNESCO was able to take advantage of that. And I think we need to do that also with capacity building. So just to conclude, I just want to say that we strongly believe that this was meant to be a perspective from an intergovernmental organization or from intergovernmental organizations. ICCROM is an intergovernmental organization, but we strongly believe that it is in the interests of our member states, because of course we operate in the interests of our member states, it is in the interests of our member states that we work with civil society to improve the conservation and management of cultural heritage. And we have, we've recognized that this is the only way that we can be effective in our mission. And it's something that I hope very much that the World Heritage Committee will be able to better understand this as time goes on. As we celebrate the 50th anniversary, World Heritage is at a crossroads. And in some ways it has never been more relevant and more well known around the world. And in other ways, it's not involving people enough, and especially not within the processes of the committee. So we are at this crossroads right now, and I think in order to remain relevant for the next 50 years, we're going to have to adopt, and again, I'll go back to ICCROM's phrasing for this, we're going to have to adopt people-centered approaches, and that's going to mean involving people, involving communities, involving civil society. So thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. On behalf of the ICCROM Library, I appreciate this very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now start with our roundtable. I ask Mr. King also to join the roundtable. And I think in lack of a roundtable in the Foreign Office, the setting is more like a panel. I invite all the speakers of our roundtable to join us here on the podium. And while they take place while I introduce them to the audience, I ask the technical staff to make sure that Professor Cameron can join us via Zoom. Please take your place. Take your chair. Thank you. Yeah, please.
Hello. Welcome everybody to our first roundtable. I will quickly introduce our speakers. First of all, Professor Cameron, who joins us via Zoom. Hello. Professor Cameron is the former Canada Research Chair in Built Heritage at the University of Montreal. She served there from 2005 to 2019, where she directed a research program on heritage conservation. She previously served as a heritage executive with Parks Canada for more than 35 years, and she has worked with the World Heritage Convention since 1987, chairing the committee in 1990 and in 2008. I also welcome Constanze Fuhrmann. She's the head of the unit Environment and Cultural Heritage at the German Federal Environmental Foundation, where she promotes innovative projects on topics such as climate change and sustainability in the field of cultural heritage. Prior to this, she worked in different heritage-related roles, for example, at the Fraunhofer Institute for Computer Graphics Research, where she was working at the Competence Center for Cultural Heritage Digitization. I also welcome Mr. Matthias Ripp, who is a historical geographer, and he's coordinating the old town of Regensburg with Stadtamthof site. He specializes in integrated heritage management, heritage communication, governance and resilience of urban heritage, and he is chairing the German Association of World Heritage Cities. He is also an appointed member of the European Heritage Panel and the regional coordinator for Northwest Europe and North America in the Organization of Heritage Cities. I also welcome Uli Frank Grebner, a trained biologist and conservationist. He started his career supporting Russian World Natural Heritage nominations. He became officer for science in the UNESCO Moscow office, later director of the World, sorry?
Where are you? Monitoring and evaluation of WWF Germany. Sorry.
Thank you very much. And he's this, as a CEO of Soccer Foundation, Greifswald, he was instrumental in the application for World Heritage of the Hyrcanian forests in Iran and the Eastern Mongolian steppes. Until recently, Uli Grebner was the managing director of the Biosphere Reserves Institute of Eberswalde University for Sustainable Development. And I'm afraid that I have not a bio of you. Is this possible? Please introduce yourself.
Hello. My name is Christina Anner. I'm the graduate of World Heritage Studies at the BTU Cottbus. And for many years I have been the member and served on the board of the International Association of World Heritage Professionals. I'm originally from Ukraine. I'm in Germany since 15 years, but my family is still there. So will try to provide a bit of a Ukrainian perspective as to the civil society in terms of war.
Thank you very much. So now we learned by your presentation that civil society is not subject but object to the World Heritage Convention. And our focus is the present role and the future role of civil society regarding World Heritage. Professor Cameron, I ask you for your statement on the role of civil society now and in the future.
Thank you, Professor Schipper, and good morning, good early afternoon from Canada. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, and I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory, the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations. I'd like to thank the German Federal Foreign Office and the Institute of Heritage Studies for this invitation. It's very interesting so far. And congratulations to you, Marie-Thérèse Albert, for your leadership over many years. I'm really happy to be among friends. I see you in the audience and join others in expressing appreciation to Birgitte for her many contributions to World Heritage. And welcome to retirement. You're going to find out it's pretty busy. I've been asked to discuss the new non-governmental organization, Our World Heritage, and its role as a tool for strengthening the protection of World Heritage as a common resource. Now, Our World Heritage is a local global foundation that brings together heritage communities, professionals, and organizations set up to support the conservation of heritage. And our main goal is to advance our work through co-learning, and I've heard quite a few people speaking of that already, advocacy, and advancing good practice. So co-learning, advocacy, and advancing good practice. The convention, and Joe has referenced this, the convention puts central governments in charge of proposing sites to the World Heritage List and accounting to the World Heritage Committee for their conservation. Generally, central governments do not directly manage these heritage places, and I think this is absolutely the same point that Joe has been making. Protection and conservation are roles that are carried out at the community and site level. There's really no specific role for civil society, for communities, and for individuals in the World Heritage processes. And indeed, the lack of civil society involvement and the prioritization of listing over the protection of heritage sites are both symptoms of an institution that is at risk of losing its global credibility, and it's in need of renewal. So I would say on that point, Joe and I are fairly aligned. There are administrative and disciplinary silos that tend to separate these different entities from each other, and I have to share an early memory. In the early years, I'd say, let's say in the pre-internet world, civil society organizations, local communities, and even site managers did not know much about World Heritage. And I can recall lots of discussions in the early years about how in various parts of the world, different versions of the operational guidelines were in circulation. So nobody out there really knew what was going on and what changes had been made. There was little communication between states party representatives and local managers of World Heritage sites in their own countries. And I have to say, I attended, because I was the chairperson that year, I attended the first meeting of the site managers in the United Kingdom, site managers of World Heritage sites. It was held at York with Sir Bernard Fielden in 1991. I was astounded, really astounded, to speak with several of the site managers who all said they didn't even know that their site, the site that they managed, had been designated as a World Heritage Site a few years earlier. So that's a very different take than today, when everything is so public and is communicated so quickly. Today, information technology has really transformed communications. Information sharing is the new norm, and global networks are now commonplace. So back to the Our World Heritage Foundation. It is a child of COVID, ironically. It was launched on the 16th of November in 2020 as a global call for action to renew the spirit of the World Heritage Convention, and by doing so, to advance the protection of the Earth's natural and cultural treasures. Our main mission is to raise awareness about World Heritage and address the challenges that the 1972 convention is currently facing, including all the threats and from climate change, and particularly at this particular moment of conflicts. Our World Heritage aims to maintain the relevance of the convention and its ability to protect our heritage for the next 50 years. So it's really looking forward. Now, this nascent NGO has championed the use of technology to build its network. As a result of COVID lockdowns last year, many people around the world were at home and available to participate virtually. In fact, one can argue that Zoom has leveled the playing field and made participation from all regions of the world a reality. It's been a wonderful experience to meet so many new people new to me at any rate, in terms of World Heritage. The foundation has a volunteer board and advisory committee, and it also has a youthful and energetic global outreach team. In 2021, which was the first year of its existence, our World Heritage developed a year-long series of debates featuring a different theme each month. Themes included the transformational impact of information technology, new heritage approaches, sustainability, of course, as well as things like disasters and pandemics. We held more than 150 online meetings, webinars, and workshops, organized actually by different regional groups and institutions, so it was very distributed, to address critical issues of World Heritage conservation. Over 600 participants were directly involved as presenters. The reach of these debates has been impressive. And for just one example that I happen to have at my fingertips was the initial information technology Globinar. The title was the transformational impact of information technology. We held a Globinar, which was held in a 24-hour period over 5 different time zones. And we managed to have an audience of over 800 people. The reports and the Zoom recordings of almost all of those sessions are available at ourworldheritage.org. We have quite a strong website. Other activities of the foundation include newsletters, advocacy for urgently threatened sites, such as those in Ukraine, and the campaign we launched to try and save the grain silos in Beirut. And this is really, as Lazar has said, it's to alert the world to these issues and to give visibility to them. Our World Heritage operates a active social media platform, or platforms, I should say. We're in several different platforms to support these exchanges. Taken together, these activities have broadened the conversation to include multiple stakeholders and bring together heritage voices that generate new perspectives, new points of view, and new sensibilities about global heritage. I think they're absolutely essential to restoring confidence and awareness of World Heritage. This year, Our World Heritage celebrates the 50th anniversary of the convention with the Globinar on November 14th, which will happen in 3 time zones. And that brings together local communities and practitioners to hear from each other about how to conserve and manage natural and cultural heritage properties. The next day, on the 15th, Our World Heritage is going to hold a symposium in Florence, partly in person and virtually, focused on how to enhance the involvement of civil society organizations in the stewardship of World Heritage sites. And then on November 16th, the actual anniversary birthday of the adoption of the convention, we will have a celebratory seminar. So that, in a nutshell, is this new foundation, Our World Heritage. I'm convinced that these programs and the powerful network of non-state actors that have chosen to become involved with Our World Heritage, it's all volunteer and people sort of say, yes, I will do this, I want to be involved. I think these are useful tools to mobilize support for protecting World Heritage sites in times of peace and in times of war. So those are my opening comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You, amongst others, stressed the issue of communication in terms of the involvement of civil society. Internet changed, of course, a lot. I want to point out another aspect, that is mobility and transport, which makes it much easier today than, let's say, 50 years ago for civil society actors, for volunteers to travel and participate in meetings, for example, or to visit sites. The next speaker is Uli Grebner. I already introduced you, and you are not just a founding member and member of the board of World Heritage Watch, but also as a biologist, a former director of the World Wildlife Fund in Germany. So you have a double perspective on natural and cultural heritage. What is your view of the involvement of civil society in regard to the World Heritage Convention?
Thank you very much. So to start with, cultural heritage is not my specialty. I come from the natural side, clearly. I represent here today World Heritage Watch, a small Berlin NGO, but a huge global network, a network of engaged civil society actors around the globe interested in World Heritage. Now, I have the feeling Mr. King already made my speech, and there's little to add. That was very good and very much along the lines that I would have argued myself. The World Heritage Convention is an agreement between state parties, clearly, but it is a convention of big relevance and importance to people everywhere. And we should not forget about this link. And currently I see the situation as if it is the state parties that prepare the nominations, it is the state parties that take the decisions, and it is the state parties that benefit most from being on the list. In this situation, you could come to a point where political thoughts are more important than technical advice. And here I see in a maturing convention, it is really important to have good and solid checks and balances. So when you said we don't need much more advisory bodies, yes, I agree to that, but nevertheless involving civil society more in the convention, I'm convinced would be of much help. Think of other areas of public interest where you also have watch organizations that help bring to the light important facts. So what speaks in favor of civil society? To my understanding, civil society can do a lot where others may not be in an as good position. Civil society is fast and flexible. To give you an example, World Heritage Watch was among the earliest, and maybe the earliest organization providing materials, stocking and packing materials to museums and heritage sites in the Ukraine to make sure that in this crisis the valuable things are stocked or maybe even taken away. Civil society has the local knowledge, has the local understanding. And here World Heritage Watch annually brings together local knowledge from World Heritage sites from around the globe. We started in 2015 with this report, and I was just given the very new report 2022, the World Heritage Watch report, which is as of now also online available. In this way, World Heritage Watch or civil society can help the operational implementation of the convention, but I also think that World Heritage, that civil society can bring or can help shaping the future of the convention. And here again, just a small example, the Potsdam Papers, where civil society made proposals on how to improve the convention and what important steps should be taken. I'm receiving your signs. I leave it here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It goes without question that civil society should play a stronger part in protecting World Heritage, but the question is at what level, when and where. You stress the reality that state parties are covering most of the process? Is it more a reasonable view that civil society will get more involvement on the state party level already, or with UNESCO? So this is maybe an issue that we can discuss in the second round. Now we'll ask Constanze Fürmann to take the word. You also in some way have a double perspective. You are in cultural heritage, but you are working for the Bundesumweltstiftung Environmental Foundation, where you heading the Office for Cultural Heritage Protection and Climate Change. So what is your perspective on civil society involvement?
Yeah, thank you very much. So taking the perspective actually of foundations and the role in society when it comes to safeguarding cultural heritage, in this discussion I would like to point out that actually in my view missions the German Federal Environmental Foundation's aims as one of the largest foundations in Europe for environmental protection, but also the protection of cultural heritage. So what actually makes us unique is that we, from the beginning on, and that is 30 years ago, we actually brought together already sustainability and cultural heritage together. So when we were founded in 1990, we actually have recognized the importance of cultural heritage as an important driver for sustainability. And that is also because the guiding principles of our foundation are the sustainable development goals, also, and the planetary boundaries. And I think in this context, I understand also the work of foundation as one of the key players in civil society to be complementary to the work of the UNESCO. And the World Heritage Committee, which also includes support in implementing sustainable strategies and cultural heritage management. And this actually in three ways, if we look at the role foundations actually have in the broad cultural landscape. So that actually brings me to the first point, which is that actually foundations can support innovation and heritage science, which is actually needed when it comes to damage investigations and conservation strategies. For example, my foundation fund projects that actually can help the heritage sector to advance and better tackle future challenges such as climate change or any other harmful environmental influences. So in this role, I actually oversee, or we see ourselves as foundations as a driving force for progress. And that actually also brings me to the World Heritage Convention, because for us it's always very important to analyze in our funding decisions, to analyze the decisions from the UNESCO and also the policy amendments in order to identify gaps and to fund projects that actually help advance the World Heritage Agenda. And to highlight one project, for example, we funded just recently a project that was about climate change and IPCC, where we actually brought together the UNESCO, ICCROM, and also the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to determine the contribution of heritage to tackle climate change and to also give heritage a much higher role on the climate agenda. And I think that is also very important, because cultural heritage can play can be seen as a key resource for climate change mitigation and adaptation. And here we as civil society can also respond to the long-standing call actually of the World Heritage Committee to intensify the cooperation of state parties with the IPCC in this case. So this is one point, and the other point is that foundations can actually also bring together relevant stakeholders to advance dialogue and to push forward a dialogue on relevant topics. For example, foundations, and that's, I think, very important, provide trustworthy platforms for communication, and we can also be mediators between contrasting viewpoints. And as we know, heritage decisions can often be very controversial, especially when it comes to balance different perspectives around sustainability and the 3 or 4 pillars of sustainability and the different SDGs, and which of course also face an increasingly problems in the context of the World Heritage Management. And here we as foundations can actually provide dialogue, we can actually initiate special funding schemes, clusters or dialogue formats on topics that we think are important to work on in order to improve dialogue for better decision making and practice. So this is also one point, and the last point I think, which is very important, is that we as foundations can also enable the wide dissemination of knowledge around important heritage developments and new approaches. For example, my foundation does this by enabling different kind of education projects when it comes to educate the young people, the young generations, but also the professional. For example, we have one education project that empower young people to protect World Heritage sites and to understand the impact of climate change on World Heritage. And I think this is very important, and it's also a totally new approach, because the potential of World Heritage sites as places of learning has not been anchored clearly in education for sustainable development strategies on one hand side. And the other hand side is that according to the World Heritage Commission, also World Heritage sites have an educational purpose, an educational mandate, and this is also something that has not broadly considered yet. Also, state parties are obliged to inform about all different kinds of damages and, for example, climate change happening on heritage sites. So that's actually something that we as a foundation think together, like climate, education, in combination with the education for sustainable development. So I think that's definitely a strength for foundations to come up with new approaches and also to be a kind of trendsetters for new ideas when it comes to dialogue formats, for example.
Thank you very much. So it was the position of ICCROM as well as World Heritage Watch that the World Heritage Convention lacks the possibility for the civil society to get involved throughout the whole processes. But nevertheless, the Deutsche Bundesumweltstiftung is one tool, one option provided by a state party for the civil society to get involved by contributing funding to activities.
We are actually not a state foundation. It's kind of irritating because we have the federal in our name, but we are funded by civil law, so we have a kind of situation.
So it's more complex than this,
so
but anyhow,
it's actually
funding,
private, yeah.
long-term funding, that is one tool to enable civil society also to get involved on a higher quality level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Now, Christina Ahner, I apologize for having dropped your bio earlier. Yeah, you are here representing the International Association of World Heritage Professionals, and you studied World Heritage at Cottbus. Anyhow, you also have a background in marketing and public relation. Maybe this also adds to our insight of civil society getting involved in such processes. I ask for your words, please.
Definitely. Thank you very much. I would like to start by recapping shortly how the civil society in Ukraine reacted to the cultural destructions from the beginning of war and how the civil society was changed. So as you know, February 24th, the Black Day for Ukraine, the destruction of cultural property and looting of Ukrainian museums started pretty much right away from the beginning. And right away, the international response was immense, and we are still so grateful for that. All the major players, including UNESCO, ICCROM, Blue Shield International, Europa Nostra, Deutsches Archaeologisches Museum, they were all involved in trying to participate in the rescue initiatives, in funding initiatives, in evacuation initiatives from the Ukrainian churches, museums, exhibitions, and all other types of cultural institutions. Unfortunately, despite that, until now there has been more than 500 Ukrainian cultural objects damaged or completely destroyed. Most of them are churches and religious institutions. There are around 31 museums damaged or completely destroyed, 45 monuments, and 87 libraries, theaters, and cultural institutions. Moreover, there are more than 7% of all Ukrainian heritage objects that are located on the temporary occupied territories, and there is unfortunately no access to information as to what is happening with them or what their fate will be deemed to be by the occupants. And it is important to know that the goal of this destruction is not random. The Russia is doing that with the particular goal in mind, that is, no Ukrainian cultural heritage equals no cultural memory and no Ukrainian identity. And they know that even if Ukraine wins the war, but the culture loses and the Ukrainian language disappears, there will be no Ukraine. There will be no Ukrainian DNA. So in many cases, the reports are that the Russian agents work into Ukrainian museums with the particular list of objects they are taking with them, and they have the list of names of people related to Ukrainian museums that they want information from. So in many cases, these attacks are planned. Not always. We know that sometimes rockets just fall where they fall, but there are more than enough reason to realize that there is a definite and a particular goal that they are trying to achieve here, which is the destruction of Ukrainian national memory. The response of Ukrainian Ministry for Culture and Information Affairs has been pretty fast. On the March 9th, so 2 weeks after the beginning of war, they established an open source for all citizens where they could upload any kind of information related to the witness of cultural destruction. So any kind of photos and testimonies could be uploaded, and then they will be verified by the ministry, and then they will be forwarded to the International Criminal Court in Hague for further investigation. There also has been a chatbot Telegram channel established, which is open again to all the people to share their witness testimonies that they live through. And the response has been immense. People are responding with their testimonies, and moreover, there has been a shift in cultural awareness in Ukraine. As for example, more and more people are switching nowadays to Ukrainian that have previously been Russian speaking in an attempt to distance themselves from anything that is Russian. And there has been a surge of cultural awareness, which is expressed in people's raising interest to Ukrainian history and culture. So if you visit any Ukrainian online bookstores or a lot of books on Ukrainian history, language, culture are being sold out. All the children's books in Ukrainian language are sold out, especially abroad. As you know, many Ukrainian refugees are women who arrived here with children, and they're attempting the best they can to to keep their child, to give him the sense of this being Ukrainian, even if they're not at home at the moment. And there has been a surge of new technology involvement in this whole process. If you look at the Ukrainian YouTube channel, it has bloomed in the last several months. There has been so many Ukrainian-speaking channels established since the beginning of war, and they have become so popular so fast. And they're not only entertaining YouTube channels, they are also the ones focused on history, culture, on modern Ukrainian literature, and so on. And it might seem superficial at first, but I think we can all assume the effect that YouTube has on younger and on future generations. So this is not to be underestimated. And there has also been a lot of citizen initiatives established in an attempt to preserve Ukrainian heritage. One of the most successful of them is called HERI, or Ukrainian Emergency Response Initiative, which has been funded by UNESCO, ICCROM, and several other international institutions. This is one of the biggest initiatives in terms of memberships. They involve the members of the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture. They are the museum employees, so any cultural actors, but also the volunteers from the civil society who are undergoing very fast on the training on the way, and they're getting involved with cultural preservation right away. The activities of this initiative involve protection of cultural heritage in times of war and post-war reconstruction of the damaged heritage. So they've been heavily involved with several museums by helping them to evacuate the objects. For that, for example, the international friends have been sending us a lot of packaging material, as the packaging material required is specific in the area that has to be not flammable blankets and all kinds of specific museum stuff. And they have also been involved in a new technology application to this process. For example, the 3D scanning of the objects is heavily on the way. So they're trying to digitalize, to document all the heritage, to preserve it before it is getting lost forever, possibly. The IT companies in Ukraine have been providing free cloud space for this purpose. So there has basically been a lot of cross-sectoral initiative coming this way, and the civil society is getting involved the best they can. Another thing is that the idea is getting deep down inside our conscience that if we cannot preserve the heritage, at least we should build an evidence base so that accountability should be ensured. I think we all know that Russia has been getting away with a lot of stuff too many times, and we hope that at least these horrific events nowadays will finally lead to some kind of accountability that will be taken.
Yeah, thank you very much. So one of the lessons learned, sad lessons learned, or lessons learned under these sad circumstances is that the safeguarding and protecting of cultural heritage in the Ukraine is unthinkable without an active civil society. Although, of course, the governmental organizations are playing their role, but civil society is playing a major part in protecting heritage. And also, it's my experience from an Austrian viewpoint that all the aid from Austria is performed by civil societies and less by the governmental sector. Yeah? Thank you very much. And I think this example is also something that should be taken into account when we systematically think through how do we have to change the system when we talk about the civil society playing a major role in future. This is a very important argument, the case of the Ukraine. Yeah. Now, Matthias Ripp, you are representing the Organization of Heritage Cities here. what is your view on the involvement of civil society? What is your perspective? What are your lessons learned from your daily work? And maybe also your perspective on the Ukraine, if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much. So representing here urban heritage sites, the situation is maybe a little bit different, because cities are made from civil society. I mean, civil society is an essential part of the cities. And in cities, we have a long experience in how to involve the civil society when it comes to urban planning projects, etc., etc. Regensburg is maybe a very specific case. We have an extremely strong civil society, and it regularly happens that the civil society stops by public vote projects that the local government thinks are very positive. So there is, I think, a strong role for the civil society, and for example, we see a tendency in the preparation of management plans to involve the civil society already in the preparation of the plan, not only in the implementation, and I think this is worthwhile to follow up. Maybe some principal ideas. I think this separation, this felt separation between civil society and cultural heritage also comes from a very traditional definition of cultural heritage that is mainly targeted on objects and understanding cultural heritage as things. I think if we embrace a more modern definition of cultural heritage that understands it as a system, then it is a natural thing that people, processes, values are part of this system. And I think this is where we as a sector need to look in the mirror and ask us, are we doing this enough? Because this felt separation between civil society is a result of a reductionist definition of cultural heritage from my point of view. So just one hint what we could do. We as urban heritage sites have made extremely good experiences with the concept of site managers as a focal point. In Germany, I remember with Roland Bernecke, we made the recommendation to the German UNESCO Commission for each World Heritage site to have a site manager, and it was an extreme success story. And these site managers are now the people that are concretely involving the civil society. And I think we need to strengthen the site managers, for example, by capacity building, by enabling them and train them in things like facilitation methods, because they have a key role in this whole process. And the second idea, when I read the topic of this session here, is we do a lot of things now on risk preparedness and disaster risk management. We have an upcoming training course in Vilnius for disaster risk management for site managers. And of course, we include the risks that are connected to war in this thinking. And I think this is also a worthwhile strategy, because there are a lot of resources built up and a lot of networks are dealing with disaster risk management and risk preparation. And I think we need to include the risk for war into these preparational things. And I know that from many talks with my colleagues in the cities that among the site managers there's maybe a lack of knowledge and a lack of methods. What is our role in this risk preparedness? I mean, are we only a small part of it? Or do we have an active role that we need to take on? And I think this is maybe worthwhile to explore this road further. And with a view to my mobile phone and the watch, I keep it like that for the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's sad that the war in the Ukraine forces us to rethink what we do, but anyhow, in your case, it definitely makes reason to bring in the lessons learned and to resettle ourselves what we do. Joseph King prepared the ground, so to say, for our discussion, and I ask him to conclude what we have said here on the panel in 3 or 4 sentences.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I can ever do that, but the two issues, listening to the the interventions here, two issues came to my mind. The first one was related to, and it's something that I even mentioned in my talk, but how do we get at the state party level more involvement? Actually, with Ukraine, we heard an excellent example of that. The problem that I worry about with that is that it's as a result of a particularly difficult situation, a particular conflict situation that they're having to deal with, and civil society is actually the ones that is stepping up. You know, my question, if you will, is how does that actually apply in places where they're not in conflict? But actually, we heard that already also a little bit with the Organization of World Heritage Cities, that indeed at the site level, actually there is a lot of interaction between governmental and non-governmental. I know OWHC has mayors also, so that's governmental on the one side, but then it's also working with the civil society, and I think that becomes a good example, I think, for us to look at. The second key issue for me here is how can civil society influence the system, the World Heritage System. And I want to be careful how I say this, because to me there are two World Heritage Systems. There's the inner system, which is the text of the convention and the text of the operational guidelines that is run by the states parties and run by the committee. And that's one level of the World Heritage System. And that's the system that ICCROM operates in, and ICOMOS, although ICOMOS is an NGO, but ICOMOS operates in it and IUCN operates in it. Then there's the larger system, and the larger system is actually the management and the care of the World Heritage Sites. And the question becomes, you know, how can civil society, so in a way, actually, you have an inside and an outside, and I don't say that in a derogatory way, but ICCROM is inside the system. The states parties, as committee members, are inside the system. The question becomes, how can our World Heritage, how can World Heritage Watch actually influence from outside the system? Because they are outside the system. They need to put pressure, but the question becomes, again, the decision makers are the states parties and the committee. You know, how can our World Heritage and how can World Heritage Watch influence the procedures, the operational guidelines, if you will, the procedures of World Heritage from the outside? And I think, to me, that's what needs to happen. You know, and that was my question when our World Heritage was formed. I love the idea. My question was, how are they going to be able to influence the decision making? You know, with World Heritage Watch, you know, same question. They bring together civil society from all around the world, and you have these great meetings, and you get reports from different sites and how that. But how does that ultimately influence the committee? And I'm not actually sure. I don't have the answer to that yet. And I think that's something that we need to discuss, and I think that's something that we need to better understand. That's my. It was more than 3 sentences, and I apologize.
Thank you. Excellent 3 to 4 sentences. Thank you very much. So time is more or less up, and now we have the choice either to drop the second round or to drop lunch. And I'm looking looking to Marie-Therese Albert, and she says we'll consume lunch and drop the second round. So thank you very much. Thank to all the speakers here, and thank you to Professor Cameron joining us via Zoom. Thank you very much, and see you after lunch.